I'll call this meeting to order, and thank you everybody for being here. We have two witnesses today who are both coming in by video conference, so we don't have the witnesses here. So just be aware of that when you're asking your questions. And today we will be talking about our study on the global state of the free press, with particular focus on Myanmar and Venezuela. We have with us Emmanuel Colombi. Il est directeur du Bureau Amérique latine.
He is Director Latin America Desk. He's been in that position since 2015. He lives in Rio de Janeiro.
Réputé pour...
And we're also meeting with Linda Lacdier.
Venezuela has placed 143rd and Myanmar 137th. So that's something probably relevant for today. We also have Linda Lacdier, who is a legal advisor with Human Rights Watch with the Asia Division. She has written a report entitled Dashed Hopes, the Criminalization of Peaceful Expression in Myanmar. So our witnesses are very well equipped to answer questions specifically on Venezuela and Myanmar, which is the focus of our study. We'll start with 10 minutes for each witness, and then we will go to questions from the members here. So on va commencer avec Monsieur.
We'll begin with Mr. Colombi. You have 10 minutes, sir. Thank you very much for hearing from me today to speak of an extremely important and concerning topic. It's very important for all defenders of freedom of the press throughout the world. We, Reporters Without Borders, is based in Paris. For 30 years, we've been promoting freedom of the press and freedom of information with representatives and correspondents on the ground. We have regional offices. As the office I had in Rio de Janeiro, we represent Latin America from Mexico to Patagonia. What we do is defend freedom of the press. We denounce through press releases and open letters the most egregious cases against freedom of the press. We also support vulnerable reporters and media outlets throughout the world. The Rio office works on a restricted list of priority countries, including Mexico. As you know, Mexico is a country where many journalists are assassinated simply for doing their work. We also work in Brazil and Colombia. And for several months now, we've been working in Nicaragua and Venezuela. Nicaragua is veering into authoritarianism. Independent journalists and opposition journalists, that is, those who don't parrot the president's line, are persecuted, arrested, tortured, insulted, threatened, etc. So to come back to the topic at hand, Venezuela, as you know, is going through a serious economic crisis. Many people have been killed since 2016. It's already a political crisis, which in January saw the election for a second mandate for President Maduro. And on January 23rd, the self-proclamation of Juan Guaido as the interim president of the country. So in this context of strong political tensions, and this is a trend we've seen before in Venezuela, before the crisis worsened. So in that contest, national reporters, that is, reporters from Venezuela, reporters of the written television and radio press, and reporters who work on internet are victims of orchestrated state censure put in place by President Maduro. This censure has been going on for months and even years. It intensified at the beginning of the year. but it's a reality we've been observing for a long time. The government of President Maduro uses several techniques to censure opposition and open medias. Anyone who's too critical of his administration is attacked, and these types of attacks, the censure, happens in different ways. In Venezuela, there is a Communications Regulation Commission, and this commission intervenes directly in the offices of independent media. Members of the commission will simply deprive radio stations and television stations of the frequencies they need to put out their broadcasts. This has been done. It was abused. The system was abused in January. Television stations wanting to broadcast Guaido's speech were cut off. Their frequencies were just shut down. And this kind of thing happens. Daily newspapers or weekly papers, written papers, also face censure and an even more vicious form. There's not enough paper. In Venezuela, the government controls the distribution of paper, newsprint, which is a natural resource. And authorities cut off access to paper supplies for the written press. So many newspapers just cannot be printed anymore for lack of paper. This is just another example of state censorship. And something else that has been going on for many years, simply the arrest of journalists who take part in demonstrations. They are arrested by the anti-riot police, which in fact is an espionage service, and they arbitrarily arrest reporters, opposition reporters, if you will, that is those who do not parrot the state line. They're put in detention. Their work materials are confiscated. This material can be destroyed by the riot police, so they will go to an opposition journalist and take away their cameras and their reporting equipment. That gives you an overview of what's happening in that country. So again, President Maduro has a whole array of censorship tools at his disposal. Something that's even more concerning, more worrying than the censorship itself is what is happening to international journalists and international media organizations. In 24 hours, no fewer than 7 foreign reporters went to Venezuela to cover the political crisis, and they were arbitrarily arrested by the Venezuelan authorities when they were actually just doing their job. There were reporters from Colombia, from Chile, from Spain, 2 journalists from France, 1 from Brazil. They were arrested, placed arbitrarily in detention. They were interrogated, and then after a certain number of hours, they were freed thanks to the work of the embassies of the countries in question. So those journalists were freed, and most of them were escorted to the Caracas International Airport, and then they were simply kicked out of the country. They were asked to leave Venezuela, to cease their reporting activities. And they had all entered the country as journalists. So that's very serious, something we denounced. We sent several emails and communications to the United Nations to denounce these methods. Nothing new to these methods, but they've intensified since the beginning of this year. And that's very concerning because the political crisis in Venezuela is far from being resolved. Reporters Without Borders and any organization which defends freedom of the press is very concerned about the freedom of information in that country. It's becoming increasingly difficult for reporters to talk about what's really happening in the country, the lack of food, the repression, the demonstrations, and simply the context in which 2019 is beginning in Venezuela. So there's a lack of information going out to the world. And I'll also say that this is dramatic. It's terrible for the Venezuelan people, which doesn't have access to independent information or critical information on what's happening in their country. The day Juan Guaido was sworn in, Venezuela media had only broadcast President Maduro's speech, so Venezuelans couldn't even find out what was happening that very day in their country because the media outlets were censored. So I just wanted to tell you just how concerned we are about the freedom of the press and freedom of information in Venezuela. Thank you very much, Mr. Colombier.
Linda Lactier from Human Rights Watch for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Hopes that Myanmar's first democratically elected civilian government in decades would better protect freedom of the press and freedom of speech in the country have not materialized. Instead, what we found is that over the past almost 3 years, there's been a serious decline in freedom of the press in the country, with increasing numbers of journalists being arbitrarily arrested, detained, and imprisoned under a range of vaguely worded and broad criminal laws. Certain topics appear to be particularly risky for journalists to cover, things such as abuses by the Myanmar military, particularly in the ethnic areas, allegations of corruption by government officials, or criticism of government officials, the military, or Myanmar's ultranationalist movement. All of these have resulted in the arrest of journalists trying to report on those issues in the country. In the most well-known case, 2 Reuters reporters, Walon and Josau, were sentenced to 7 years in prison under Myanmar's Official Secrets Act in apparent retaliation for uncovering a massacre in the village of Indin in Rakhine State. But that case is only one of the many cases of journalists who have been arrested in Myanmar in the last few years. According to civil society group Atan, since up until September 2018, at least 43 journalists have been arrested in Myanmar since the NLD-led government took power. These arrests have had a serious chilling effect on journalists working in the country. Just give you a few examples of the use of criminal laws against journalists in Myanmar. Lawi Wing of the Irrawaddy and 2 reporters from Democratic Voice of Burma were arrested after they went to an area controlled by an ethnic armed group to cover a drug burning ceremony being performed by that group. They were doing their job, they were reporting the news, but as they were returning to Yangon, they were arrested and they were accused of violating Myanmar's Unlawful Associations Act, which is a very broad law that's used to punish anyone viewed as having any contact with one of Myanmar's many ethnic armed groups. They were detained for 2 months before the case was ultimately dropped after the attacks that took place in Rakhine State in 2017. While the case was ultimately dropped, the message it sent was very clear. Reporters who travel to conflict areas, reporters who have contact and report on ethnic armed groups risk arrest in the country. Myanmar's multiple laws making defamation a criminal offense are also being used against journalists. Use of defamation laws against journalists has a serious chilling effect on freedom of the press. In just one example, Sui Win, the co-founder of news service Myanmar Now, has been on trial for the past 18 months, accused of criminally defaming the ultranationalist monk Wiratu. After Wiratu issued a statement applauding the murder of lawyer U Ko Ni, Sui Win assigned a reporter to look into how that statement should be analyzed under criminal law and under the rules of Buddhism. And in the article that the reporter wrote, he quoted a monk saying that Wiratu should be defrocked because he was condoning murder. That article was sent out by Myanmar Now. Sui Win put it on his personal Facebook page, and he was criminally charged with defaming the monk Wiratu. The last 18 months, he's had to travel 630 kilometers each way to Mandalay every other week for the trial that is ongoing, with a serious disruption to his personal and his professional life. And he said, in his view, that case has put a serious chill, a serious fear in all newsrooms for covering issues related to the Buddhist monks and the nationalist movement in the country. In at least 2 cases, journalists have been arrested for what was clearly satire. The Voice Daily published a satirical review of a movie that had been produced by the military and shown on national television. And for that, the editor was arrested for defaming the military. The editor of a small journal in Tanantiri is currently on trial for defaming a regional administrator in a satirical article about a local election. So the results of all of these arrests and detentions is a climate of fear in Myanmar, particularly among local journalists. A local journalist told me that local journalists feel much more vulnerable than international journalists. They're living in the country. They don't have the support networks that international journalists have. He said, for us as local journalists, there's no guarantee of our work security or our safety. Activists and ordinary citizens are also being arrested for speaking out issues like military abuses and corruption. People have been arrested for telling the media about a military strike on a church in Kachin State, for calling for help for trapped civilians during a conflict between the Tatmadaw and the Kachin Independence Army, for making allegations of corruption against a regional minister, even for telling what it was like to be a child soldier in Myanmar's military. Ang Ko Twe is currently serving a 2-year sentence for telling Radio Free Asia, giving an interview to Radio Free Asia, talking about his experiences as a child soldier in Myanmar. The prosecution of people speaking about these sorts of issues makes it much more challenging for journalists to get stories to report on these very important issues in the country, military abuses, corruption, child soldiers, because it makes people afraid to talk and because it makes the journalists much more fearful about reporting on those subjects. Another threat facing journalists who report on sensitive subjects is threats from
I apologize for the
ultranationalism.
interruption. We have a technical issue. I'm going to have to suspend the committee for just a moment. So you will lose us for a moment, but please remember your spot because we will be coming back to you. Apologies for that. I was suspend. What is it? So resume. Okay, apologies for the delay. We will try once more. So, Ms. Lachter, if you wanted to continue with your testimony, and we'll hope that it works a little bit better with the sound this time.
All right, thank you. All right. So journalists and activists also face threats by ultranationalists and militant supporters of the government and the military when they touch on these sensitive topics. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Esther Tucson left Myanmar for her own safety in December 2017 after receiving death threats from government supporters who were unhappy with her reporting on Aung San Suu Kyi. Finally, media freedom in Myanmar is being hampered by limited access to information and limited access to conflict zones. Many journalists told me that the current government is not responsive, does not provide information, does not respond to questions. So there's a problem with access to information, and there are broad restrictions on access to the current areas of conflict in Rakhine, Kachin, and Shan states. So I hope that concerned governments, such as the Canadian government, can press the Myanmar government to take steps to better improve media freedom. The report that I issued that was released on Friday identifies many of the laws that are being used against journalists and against ordinary citizens for peaceful speech, laws that should be amended or repealed. And also, so I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the testimony, and we will start immediately with questions, starting for 7 minutes with Mr. Sweet.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your great and courageous work on making sure that we have a free and secure press. I wanted to ask you, there's a free country like Canada and others like it. Are there things that we can do without any concern of any group that governments getting involved with media might, how would I say, sway the media itself? Is there something that we can do to help journalists in areas, particularly where their lives are in danger, as a nation that hasn't been done so far, to lend a helping hand to those places where, you know, we've mentioned two places in particular that we've done many studies on, Venezuela and Myanmar. What could be the role of the Canadian government to assist the safety and security of journalists in those countries?
I think one thing that governments can do is that embassies in place can reach out to local journalists and to recognize them and support them. It does, in some places, give a little bit more protection for them if governments know that embassies in place are looking out for the journalists and know who they are, because local journalists particularly can feel very vulnerable and very isolated and very alone. That's just one small thing that I think governments can do.
And the other witness have any comment on that?
De la même façon, je pense que le soutien des ambassades à des journalistes en situation de danger peut-être.
In a similar way, I think that embassy support is an interesting idea and can make a difference. What governments can do, and what the government of Canada has already done, is to make visible the problems that we are flagging. Censorship, the lack of information for Venezuelans themselves. And there's something else that hasn't been mentioned. It's financial support. The fact that Canada can fund training for journalists on the ground. Often they need training in cybersecurity. Often they need physical protection on the ground. So protective equipment and even support for media offices. How that would happen is a different matter. There are many international organizations like Reporters Without Borders and Human Rights Watch who are providing direct assistance to media and media organizations who are in critical situations. But again, there's always the financial reality. So there would also be training for independent journalists who don't know how to deal with threats such as arrests, physical violence, physical threats. So any kind of financial support can help. However, ultimately, the most important thing is to talk about what is happening, to denounce what is happening on the ground in these countries, including in Venezuela.
Like there's a debate right now in this country about in regards to government funding of the media, and I don't want to go there. We're talking about international press freedom, but I do want to go to another place where it would be hard to come to consensus. But we need to have some dialogue, I think, between organizations like yours and governments. I recently read one of Winston Churchill's old classic quotes that a lie can make it around the world before the truth gets its pants on in the morning. I can't. He said that in his time. I can't believe what it would be like now with social media. So we all agree that there's probably a line that gets crossed between propaganda and being an angle on a story. But many of us probably wouldn't agree where that line is. Is there a way for your organizations to have some dialogue with governments so that we can, how would I say, be better educated as policymakers to determine where that line exists?
That are willing to engage with us on these issues. We also try in countries where we're working to engage with governments on these issues. One of the risks we have is that many countries in which governments have tried to draw lines or make laws is what we found, as is true with hate speech laws. Often those laws, however well-intended they are, tend to be used against the minority by the majority as opposed to the reasons for which they were intended.
Done.
Compléter de la même façon, Reporters sans frontières essaie donc.
Reporters Without Borders is trying to help people on the ground to discuss with authorities. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's impossible. And Venezuela is a country where we were not able to talk with the authorities, as we have in Nicaragua and Cuba. So we haven't had an open dialogue with Venezuelan authorities. And when it comes between information versus propaganda, sometimes that's a very fine line. Many countries and governments are thinking about how to deal with fake news, how to stop its propagation. As you said, with social media networks, false news, false information is able to move much faster than before. It's actually pretty dramatic. But again, what we've been able to see about fake news and the way governments have reacted, well, it's not enough. They've fallen short. Because who's going to decide whether information is true or false? Who's going to decide whether it's propaganda or legitimate? It's very complex. But thankfully, in some countries, there's a good debate on what the difference is. But in other countries, like those which are led by authoritarian regimes, it's impossible to talk about that. We don't engage in politics, but we are working very hard to denounce censorship and the lack of freedom of press.
I'll move to Mr. Tabera for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses that are being here today. I just want to step back a little bit and talk a little bit about the history in Venezuela. So my question will probably be to Mr. Colombi. I want to talk about the state of the free press and how it has diminished over the years. And if we can go back into 3 presidency, not just only Maduro, Chavez, and before Chavez, President Caladra. In 1967, he brought in a constitution, and it was stated that Venezuela was one of more of the stable Latin American countries. So can you just briefly describe a little bit of how the state of the free press was under Caladra, then under Chavez, which diminished quite a bit, and then the current state now? And then I'll end with one last question.
Je n'ai pas suffisamment, pour être très honnête, assez.
Well, I honestly don't have enough knowledge of what was happening before 1967 to give you a straightforward analysis. But what I can say is that there is no freedom of the press without democracy. And since the arrival in power of Chavez and Maduro, there's been a continual degradation of freedom of the press, generally speaking, in that country. The legislative framework is more and more limiting. There are fewer rights for reporters. There are legal persecutions, arrests, criminal findings of guilty. What I can tell you, without going too far back in time, is that we have observed a continual degradation of the general situation for freedom of the press in Venezuela, and there's a direct correlation with the social crises. And a social crisis is always linked to an economic crisis. That's exactly what's happening in Venezuela today. There's political tension, there's social tension under Chavez, and today under Maduro. Censorship has simply grown. And that's why we're worried about what will happen in the coming weeks. The political crisis is far from resolved, and every time there are demonstrations, every time the opposition tries to make its voice heard, tries to defend its rights, calls for more democracy, more freedom of the press, more freedoms, every time that happens, and this happened since 2007, since Maduro ascended to power, repression has gone up, arrests have gone up, censorship has gone up. And again, there are new types of censorship happening today with the internet. There are very worrying bills that Maduro wants to pass. He wants to pass laws to consolidate his control over private data, private information. In fact, Maduro's government is working on a bill precisely to limit freedoms even more.
And quite frankly, even regular civilians that are putting up blogs, putting things on social media. What is the regime charging them for when they're reporting on, upcoming protests that are happening, the civil unrest, and when journalists are reporting basically facts on the ground? What is the regime charging them with in Venezuelan courts?
Ah oui, vous avez plein d'accusations.
Oh, anything you can imagine. You can be accused of spying, of conspiracy. In fact, there's a very detailed list, a very long list of charges which can be used against local and foreign reporters. Some foreign reporters, there's a German one, BD Six, who's been held in detention for several months now, and he's been accused of spying because he was taking pictures of President Maduro when Maduro was giving a public speech. And he does not have access to counsel. He's only been allowed to speak with his family once in the 2 months since he's been jailed. So there's a whole series of accusations which can be made. Clearly, they're fake, they're fictitious, but not only reporters are being targeted, bloggers are. Twitter users, there's a Twitter user who's been jailed in Venezuela because he unveiled public information on the on a flight taken by President Maduro in Venezuela. So a Twitter user put out on Twitter the flight pattern of President Maduro, and he was accused of attempting to destabilize the government and of preparing a terrorist attack. So there are a lot of such examples, and these are absurd accusations as far as we are concerned.
Castle for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's so many thought-provoking questions that come up just from the responses that you've had to previous questions with regard to the definition of journalism, with regard to the independence of a free press versus propaganda. So I'd like either of you to talk a little bit about, or both of you, I should say. I'll use my time for both of you to comment and just explore on a couple of things that I'll put forth to you. So the connection between the financial health of the news industry and the independence of media, freedom of the press and independence of the press, considering the training of actual journalists as opposed to state-run press that is producing propaganda, or perhaps the state press is doing the fact-checking and there is propaganda from an opposing side. How do you see us addressing those, especially today when there is, and another thing you might want to comment on, there's a growing animosity, it seems, for journalists in general and for the free press. What, if anything, do you see that Canada can contribute to a healthier narrative for that? And I guess let's start with Linda, and then Emmanuel, you can take a few minutes after that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to actually start with the last question, which is what can Canada do? I think one of the things Canada can do is speak up very strongly about the importance of a free press around the world, and to press countries where the press is not free to better protect freedom of the press and to stop censoring the press and to stop arresting journalists simply for doing their jobs. In terms of the question about animosity towards journalism, that is a big problem, and it's a big problem in Myanmar, in fact, and it's a problem that is not being helped by a government that, although it ran on a manifesto promising press freedom, has members of the government that regularly demonize or denigrate the press and support the prosecution of journalists. So I think, again, that Canada, in speaking to countries where the press is denigrated, where the press is not free, should be calling out those countries and saying, this is not the way that you treat the free press. Free press has a role to play in a democracy, or a quasi-democracy, or what purports to be a democracy, and you should be supporting it. In terms of financial health and independence, obviously a media that is struggling financially is much more vulnerable to being vulnerable to pressures to report certain ways or not report certain things if advertisers or financial backers pressure them. A financially healthy press is obviously a press that has more freedom, more independence. I think I'll stop there.
Évidemment, la question de l'indépendance des médias est très importante.
Really, the response of media is very important since we're talking about freedom of the press here. It's important for Venezuelan voters, for Venezuelans in general. They need to know who are the owners of media outlets, of the media that we all consume. Journalism is an industry. Information is produced. So it is important to educate the population about the media. If you consume information you need to know where it comes from. If you know where it comes from, you might understand why information is presented a certain way, and then you might want to find information from another source, so you can make up your mind. In Canada and in countries in general, it's very important to educate their populations, to improve media literacy. People need to understand what a conflict of interest is. They need to understand that information can be manipulated. And social media, which we mentioned earlier, have made the consumption of information much more easily. And it's all the more important in that case to know where information comes from, who's putting it out. Therefore, when media ownership is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, that's very dangerous for freedom of the press. So we do everything we can to promote multiple information sources, multiple media sources. It's very important for people to have access to a wide range of information from a wide range of sources. Again, it's an idea that we promote. It's a form of basic media pluralism. And to respond to the issue about this negative climate towards journalists, well, I agree with you on that. Media in general, including large media organizations, all share the responsibility of getting information out, of learning what's going on the ground. I myself am a French national. I know what is happening in France with the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vesters. It's my responsibility to know what's happening on the ground in my country. Reporters are messengers. They report what's happening on the ground. Reporters have to be ethical, they have to be professional, and they have to go back to basics. They have to check their facts, cross-check their facts. Sometimes they forget to do that, and this might lead to the fact that some people don't trust journalists today. As for governments, they have to educate people more. They have to raise media literacy, and they have to insist on reporters doing the fact-checking, which they need to do to produce better information.
Next round, because we're lacking time, we'll just go to 3 questions, one each of 3 minutes. So go ahead, Mr. Freshscatos.
Much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. When the internet first developed, everybody had such high hopes for it for a number of reasons, but there were advocates of democracy in this country and around the world that thought that it would actually make the world more democratic, and the jury is very much still out on that. I wonder if you could speak with special reference to social media and how it's been used by journalists, by advocates for democracy as well. Is it helping democracy or is it hindering democracy in those two contexts? To both, yeah. A Myanmar perspective and then the Venezuelan perspective.
I mean, I think social media has had a very complicated role in Myanmar. Social media in Myanmar, in Myanmar, basically the internet is Facebook. That is pretty much the only internet that most people know and use. And Facebook has played a very complicated role. It is actively used by activists on the ground to promote democracy, to talk about protests, to raise awareness, to counter hate speech. It has in many ways played a very positive role, but it has also played a very negative role. There has been a huge amount of abusive speech on Facebook in Myanmar. It arguably helped fuel the ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity that took place in Rakhine State. So, as you say, that the jury is very much out on the role that Facebook plays and in social media and whether it's positive or negative in Myanmar overall.
Pour le Venezuela, je dirais que
As far as Venezuela is concerned, I'd say that it's fairly positive, actually. The debate about internet and freedom of the press. I can't go into detail, but in Venezuela, regarding the crisis the country is going through, Twitter is fundamental and one of the rare tools which is allowing opposition and independent media, that is, media non-aligned with the government, to get their message out, because they can't get their news out on traditional news channels, which are being closed down, shut down by the Maduro government. But again, Twitter is a fundamental source of news for myself, for my colleagues. And again, Twitter is one of the rare sources of information still available in that country to get information quickly. However, what we noticed last week is that Twitter, but also Instagram, Facebook, social media in general, are perceived as being a danger by the government. And last week, there were strange cuts to the internet access in some parts of the country, and limited access to platforms like Twitter and Instagram. So the government has the total control over communications infrastructure, which allow internet to operate. So again, if the government sees these outlets as a threat, and if the government feels too much dangerous information for it is getting out there, the government has the power to shut down the internet or to suppress access to social media platforms. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is running out, so we will continue with the next questioner.
Mr. Sorensen, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, and it is a real pleasure to be here, and I thank both our guests for your testimony today. I know that it will help this committee as they write a report and as they look at this subject. And I want to thank you. I think a number of people have asked the question, what can Canada do? And thank you for your answers. That's caused us to think a little bit more on that. I can tell you that over the last number of decades, there's been certain things added. Even when we negotiate a free trade agreement, one of the things all governments, I think, really seriously ask is, what are the human rights levels in those countries that we're trying to negotiate a free trade agreement with? What is the freedom of religion? What is the freedom of speech, freedom of association? These are things that we've added into the equation as we've tried to come up with free trade agreements or any type of negotiation as we negotiate with other countries. And to Mr. Emmanuel Colombe, I also want to commend you for bringing in, I think you talked about the responsibility of journalists. You said, there's certain things that we have to check our facts. We have a code of conduct or a code of ethics that we try to live by. And I wonder, maybe if you would just comment on this. One of you mentioned satire. And I can tell you, in the last 5 years, there's been much more, I think, with predominance the internet and social media now. There is so much satire there. And I represent a constituency where I can tell you, I have had calls, like I'm not going to say hundreds of calls, but when there is some satire, people sometimes absolutely believe it. And they get worked up over it. And when you get worked up over it, typically a lot of, governments and other governments may tend to push back on that type of thing. So I guess my question is a little more on the journalist code of conduct. Are there certain things that, both sides obviously have to do, but should there be certain things that we as a country say to our journalists, or at least warn them of the areas in a conflict area of what they might be facing? So just maybe you'd like to comment on that.
And just a reminder, we only have 30 seconds for the response. So if you can be very brief.
Go ahead. Simplement en 2 mots.
Well, briefly, It's not the responsibility of a government to tell reporters what they should do, but perhaps they should educate young generations about what is satire, what is a press agency, what is a left-leaning or right-leaning paper. And once voters have all that information, they'll be able to make up their own minds and not attack a reporter because they wrote a satirical piece about an issue. So again, it all starts with education to prevent voters from taking any information at face value. There's freedom of the press, but within that are different categories. There's satire, there's right-leaning, left-leaning. So again, government's job would be education.
We will now turn to Ms. Hardcastle for the final 3 minutes.
Thank you. So we know that there are different laws in different countries about free press. And in terms of us talking and denouncing the oppression of a free press in other countries, do you think part of what we should be doing actually has an international role, a United Nations role about advancing a freedom of the press and educating much in the way that Emmanuel was describing, like that journalism is a profession. It is not just a tool for propaganda, but it is supposed to be independent. I'm not sure where we can go with it, but I know even in Myanmar, they have a telecommunications law that, anyone can use. And then in Venezuela, they're doing, they can net block opposition, and it's well within their law and constitution. So can you just talk about how we might advance that as an international community, perhaps within the UN? I'm sure I have limited time. Emmanuel, I know your wheels are turning.
Well, it's a very vast question, hard to answer in a few seconds. So, briefly, at the UN, Canada's voice is very important. The more we can further this cause, the better. We've been making many requests at the UN for the creation of a position of special commissioner, a special advisor for media, for press freedom for the Secretary General. So if Canada could push for that position, we would be very happy. Thank you very much.
Your very informative testimony, and thank you to the committee members for helping us to keep to the time, even though we lost a few minutes there. And with that, we will adjourn our meeting. Thank you.